Hi friends, in today's episode of Andrew Good Camera, we're going to be comparing two affordable Cine lenses in hopes to help you and me decide which one is better. Cine lenses are expensive, and I don't know this for sure, but I'm guessing that part of the reason for that is due to the fact that they're sold in much lower volumes than photography lenses are, which are generally more affordable for comparable technology. But regardless, that's a problem for us small filmmakers and creators who don't want to take out a second mortgage on our homes to purchase a set of Cooke lenses, for instance. Which is why it's great that we have these more affordable, wallet-friendly options. And today I want to compare these two lenses. We've got the Rokinon 50mm T1.5 DSX lens, and then the 7Artisan 50mm T2.0 Spectrum lens. And because we're going to be referring to these two lenses quite often and naming them a lot in this video, it's going to get old saying Rokinon 50mm T1.5 DSX and 7Artisan 50mm T2 Spectrum all the time. So henceforth, and for the rest of the review, I shall be referring to them as respectively Roke and Art. And one of these is going to be sent back, and one of them is going to earn the right to be my primary video lens for the video work that I do on my other channel. And just some context there so you can see what will go into my prioritization of these two lenses. On my other channel, Build a Better Bike, I build and restore mountain bikes, and where I don't have someone to shoot for me, I rely on my best friend here. This is the Rhino Arc V2 and the follow focus to give me the dynamic shots that I need. So setting up for follow focus correctly and reliably is absolutely essential. So both of these Cine lenses have what I need to do that, which is manual focus, of course, manual everything, and declicked aperture, right? And also both of these lenses have standard gearing and standard positioning vis-a-vis the other lenses in the respective series, so that you can set up the follow focus and use the same settings when you switch, for instance, 50mm to 35mm. Both systems have that, and all of those features are obviously what you want in a good Cine lens series. While both of these lenses come in a series, I'm just going to be comparing the 50mm in each series, and this is appropriate for what I shoot. At least 50mm is probably the most important focal length to start with. And yes, I will let the winner here of the 50mm contest decide which series I will commit to for the rest of the Cine lenses, as I have money to purchase them. So they both look pretty good at a glance. But which one is better? Let's start with price. And in this case, we're going to award 1 point for Art, for coming in at a very reasonable $379 USD, while Roke fancies himself in a different league at a painful price of $498 USD. Looking at size and weight, when we add the adapter, which I have to have since this is the Nikon F version of Mr. Roke, and he does not come in a Z-mount version, but until he does, I have to use an adapter. And with the adapter, they're about the same length, or about the length of one Fuji X100V, which happens to be my favorite unit of measurement. When it comes to weight, there is a substantial weight difference. When Roke is wearing that adapter, he comes in at 574 grams, or 1.2 X100Vs, whereas Art is a bit more hefty at 724 grams, or 1.4 X100Vs. And the reason for that weight difference is that Art has an all-metal construction, while Roke has a great deal of fantastic plastic. If I were doing a lot more handheld work, that might be a point in favor of Roke, but where most of my work is on the slider, like I said, I'm okay with the extra weight, and I prefer that all-metal construction. So for me, that's a point in favor of Art. This next category will matter to some of you, but not to others. For you action videographers, you'll note that Roke has a nice weather sealing gasket, whereas Art does not enjoy this feature. Point for Roke. However, I'm a Nikon Z shooter, and Roke does not yet have a mount for me as of the beginning of 2024, which is, to me, completely excusable this late in Nikon Z's development. So what I've got here is the Nikon F mount adapter, which effectively compromises the weather sealing, point in favor to Art for supporting Nikon Z. When it comes to fit and finish, the little things matter. And I have to say, I was disappointed with Roke's photography style lens cover. Whereas Art utilizes friction-held slip-on cover, which just makes things more simple when you're in a hurry swapping lenses. Point to Art. When it comes to the ends of these lenses, I noticed that Roke comes equipped with a fashionable bayonet lens hood that feels, again, very photography lens-ish, where typical for serious cine work, you're going to employ a matte box, so you wouldn't really have a need for a lens hood attachment. But Art doesn't have that, which, I mean, doesn't matter anyway. But there are screw holes which are to enable the mounting of exterior stabilization of some kind. But this also seems not that important, not enough anyway for me to warrant awarding a point either way. So we'll call these aspects of these two lenses a wash. But what is a big deal is the focus throw. And here's where, again, disappointment with Roke, which has only a 90-degree focus throw. Maybe that's ideal if you're focusing by hand, it probably is, but with the use of any sort of follow focus, the 270-degree focus stroke offers more precision and seems much more desirable and gets Art yet another point. And while we're on the subject of focus throw, let's stop talking and just listen for a second. Here's the sound test of the Rokinon. And here's the sound test of the 7Artisan. As you can hear, Roke is not quite as smooth, at least when focusing quickly. It's not quite grinding, but you do hear it, whereas Art is smooth as Tom Selleck's mustache. To some of you, this won't matter at all to you, and some of you don't know who Tom Selleck is anyway. But for me, my content is really just 1 degree away from being ASMR. And where I have little choice but to mount a shotgun mic to the top of my camera, having a silent focusing lens matters a lot. Another point to Art. When we look at sharpness, Roke is just not very sharp at all at T1.5. In fact, it's bad enough that coupled with its less than ideal chromatic aberration, which we'll visit in a minute, with Roke, I'd probably just stick with T2 and above most of the time unless I needed that little bit more light allowance. And when we look at the lenses side by side at T2, Art has a leg up for sure in both the center and in the corners. Additionally, take note of the distortion, where Roke has noticeably more distortion at T2 than Art. When we compare at the 2.8, we see the same story. Art is clearly more sharp. At 5.6, they look very similar and are plenty sharp at the center, but Roke still just isn't quite there at the corners, where Art shows his composure. When we get out to T16, I can't tell a difference really. Center or corner both look pretty darn good, but astute observers will have noticed that Roke was never able to correct that obvious distortion. But here's where Roke has a slight advantage over Art, being able to stop down to T22, which is awesome for those times you forget your ND filter to a shoot, or, you know, don't have any non-broke ND filters, like someone. Okay, so we covered 3 topics there. By my count, Roke gets a point for being able to get an albeit soft but good enough for low light T1.5, and another point for reaching a pretty darn sharp T22. But I'm gonna give Art 2 points for having a strong advantage in the sharpness department, which is fairly important, so that's why I'll reward it 2 points. And by the way, the 7Artisan brand is typically seen as the cheaper lens on the block, so this is actually a big surprise to me to see the underdog outperform another established brand. And then the other thing that we saw was Art remained non-distorted while Roke could not seem to hold his beer. So 1 more point for Art. Next, we'll look at minimum focus distance. Again, this might not matter to all of you, but for me, who needs to get in close to all those little tiny bibs and bobs of the bike repair restoration process, if I'm massively restricted by how close I can get to those little parts, it's a huge bummer. And for this, we're going to have to give the win to Roke, which can get quite a bit closer. When it comes to focus breathing, Art does a pretty fine job of controlling this, whereas our friend Roke continues to struggle just a bit. Point for Art. Just as I would predict, there is certainly some chromatic aberration happening at the widest apertures. You can see here both at T2 and stop down to T2.8, it's present and it's about the same. It might appear that it might be slightly worse in the Roke, but that's simply because the focus was slightly forward. But I'd give them a draw here on chromatic aberration. And you can see that F4, it's largely resolved. We'll give them a tie for chromatic aberration. And while we're here looking at these gorgeous photos of the world's best camera, let's take a peek at the bokeh. Roke has a rounded 9-blade aperture, whereas Art has a 12-bladed aperture, but it's not rounded. So let's see how that plays out. Here you can see the capabilities of Roke at its T1.5. Very smooth, very nice. And when we compare them both at T2, there's no question that Roke is smoother. And we see this throughout the aperture ranges of these two lenses. Bokehlicious 0.4, Roke. As far as flaring, yet again, I was slightly disappointed by Roke. I mean, I do have to temper that with the fact that previous versions of Rokinon's Cine lenses were horrible at controlling flaring. Just absolutely wretched. So this has significantly improved. Having said that, look at how well Art does. Just kicks that flaring to the curb. Still plenty of ghosting on both lenses, but I'd take Art into oncoming nighttime traffic long before I'd take Roke there. Point for Art. Finally, when it comes to color, I didn't do any real scientific testing here, but I did notice that Roke has slightly more yellowish tint to over Art's more red-ish tones. And in the shadows, when Art is wide open, it's very cool, but warms up as it stops down. But I only noticed these subtle differences when reviewing footage, and like I said, nothing was scientifically done here, so having said all that, I'm not willing to award any points anywhere for color. I'm not too bothered by small color indifferences, warmer or cooler. It's just something you expect when you are shooting with budget lenses. So after all that analysis, we have a very, very clear winner. To me, there's little debate here. Art wins by double. This was a huge surprise. I fully expected Roke to take the W here. And for a poor content creator, this is great news as it will save me more than $100. But between the overall sharpness, the lack of distortion, lack of focus breathing, that all metal build, overall attention to detail in the build, the native Z mount, the wonderful feel of the 270-degree focus throw, the better controlling of flaring, there's just no question that the 7Artisan T2.0 Spectrum is a better value and a better lens. I mean, sure, I will miss out when it comes to the slight advantage of the light gathering of the Roke, and what I'll miss even more is that close focus. That one is a bit painful, but I can work around that by cropping 4K footage. And I would have liked the ability to stop down to f/22 on occasion, but those small concessions are tempered by the excitement that I have to get my money back for the Roke lens. And even more than that, I can't wait to use my new pal, Art, in my art. So that's all for now, you guys. I hope you found this helpful, and if not, what I really hope is that you are wildly entertained by this riveting content. Remember to do good with your camera, and we'll talk to you again real soon.